Hello, this is Linda Bourne with week 4 of Caregivers Corner. It's a weekly YouTube video series designed to help you to make the transition into the caregiver's role. Last week we talked about working your way through grief, not getting stuck in it, releasing the person that you had known that perhaps cared for you in the past, and accepting the person that you're now knowing in that new caregiver-patient relationship. You keep the connectedness to your loved one, but you don't continue to react to them according to the rules of your past relationship. I think that's particularly tricky with a spouse or with a parent. It's hard when that person has been someone who took care of you in the past to accept that now you are the one who is the caregiver and they aren't going to be able to reciprocate. I talked about last week that illustration that helped me so much to understand that I could still love and accept my mother, although she no longer responded to me as she used to. When my children were young and they were asleep, I still loved them, even though they weren't doing a thing for me. Many parts of my mother's brain have fallen asleep, if you want to think of it that way. They just aren't there anymore. It's not her fault. She can't help it. And so what I have learned to do is to lean harder on the Lord and less on my mom. And that's kind of called growing up, I think. This week we're going to be talking about releasing the bad stuff. Anger, guilt, resentment, those toxic emotions that if you take them to your heart and keep them will make you sick. They will sicken you, sometimes even physically, but they would definitely contaminate your relationship, not just with the person you're taking care of. You can't keep those negative things in a box labeled with your loved one's name, that your care recipient's name. They escape. You will take it out on other people as well. And who wants to become a bitter and resentful person? Not me, but I tell you, it's difficult to keep from happening. And we're going to talk about how maybe there are some ways to keep that from happening. I'm going to read to you a passage from My Mom Has Alzheimer's, Inspiration and Help for Caregivers, which is my book. And in these videos, I'm sharing with you much of the information that's contained in the book. Just when I wanted to exhibit kindness, supportiveness, and love to my mom, I was suffused by feelings of resentment, guilt, and anger. And then there's a quote from my mom. Linda was in, "Don't complain about how she acts, Santa Ruth. After all, you raised her." My mother had a lot to put up with when I was a new caregiver, and she handled it much of the time with grace and much of the time with exasperation and anger. And so that first year of caregiving was rocky. I've mentioned earlier in these videos, if you can get through that first caregiving year, it's very possible that things will ease out and you will find that you've adapted and there can continue to be a high quality of life for both the caregiver and the patient, even following this devastating diagnosis. We're going to talk first of all today about resentment. Resentment occurs when you feel that someone has not done for you what they ought to have done, that they've let you down in some way, and so that you have the right to hold a grudge against them because they are wrong toward you. Now, as a Christian, we know that we are to forgive as we've forgiven, love as we've been loved, but lots of times it seems to me that those in our closest inner circles are kind of exempt from those godly rules. Sometimes we hold loved ones accountable where we would maybe have better success forgiving a stranger. I know that was certainly true with my mother and me. There is such a thing as past resentment that has to be dealt with when you begin caring for a loved one who used to care for you in the past. So there's that role reversal. You might find yourself remembering a time when you were perhaps 11 years old and your mother dropped you off at an afternoon matinee and fell asleep and then forgot to come and get you, so that you were left alone outside a movie theater when it was getting dark and you were frightened. And how awful was that she had let you down in that way? A memory of that experience that happened to me actually came back to me in the middle of the process of bathing my mother after she first came to live with us. We were having just an awful time. She was embarrassed. I was awkward. She was resentful. I was resentful. And in the middle of this process, it was just like a flashback. This memory came back to me, and it was cumulative. I felt the weight of cumulative resentment toward my mother, and I was really did not behave well toward her because of that. That was when I first became aware that it is important as an adult child to open your heart and mind to the Lord, if that's the way you do it, and I hope it is. Allow Him access to those memories that you have of how that parent has hurt you in the past. That needs to be reconciled and forgiven when you go into your caregiver relationship, caregiver-patient relationship. You need to go in clean as you can, and just be aware of how past resentment can poison your present relationship. There's anger to be dealt with. I think my predominant anger toward my mother was anger because she's leaving me. Again, that's something that she can't help. But what about the things that they can help? What about the things that seem to be a continuation of sin or wrongdoing in their life that they've always had? You got to be careful about that. Sometimes our perceptions of the past are shaded by our present experiences, so that if you are currently feeling anger and resentment toward your loved one, it seems as though at that point in time that you always felt that way. There is a dynamic that I've been told that comes into play, that once your loved one has passed away and you are freed of this current stress level of being their caregiver and being the one who's in charge, that those negative memories fall away and you are now free to remember the good things from the past. And I would just like to challenge myself and you as well to allow some of those good memories to influence your relationship with your loved one in the present. Be aware that your current difficult experiences with your loved one can tilt your perspective of the past in a way that isn't accurate. Try to love with that love that covers a multitude of sins. Try to accept that the way you're feeling right now may not be an accurate representation of what is true. A valuable exercise is to make a list of the ways that your loved one has blessed you. And for me, I opened my mind and heart to the Lord and just said, help me to think of the ways my mom has blessed me. And the list was long. From tap dance lessons that she drove me to the city to take when I was 3 years old, to the Starlight Theater in my teenage years, to the ways that she prayed for me through the night when my daughter was being born. Many, many blessings upon blessings. Sometimes you have a parent that you're having to take care of, or a loved one that you're having to provide care for, who has not blessed you very much in the past. And in that case, make a list of the ways that you've become stronger because of the lack of that relationship that you would have liked to have had. There are almost always ways to count your blessings, and sometimes it's very important to do that in your caregiver-patient relationship, just to keep yourself a little bit in balance, because you don't want to get to the end of your loved one's life and have to cope with a lot of guilt afterwards. In as much as you can express appreciation for them and keep that in the front of your memory and your relationship with them, I think both your care recipient and you will be blessed. We'll close this week's Caregivers Corner with a quote from Matthew Henry, who was a 17th century biblical scholar who has left us a wonderful Bible commentary that's now in the public domain. When any harm is done to us, examine whether we have not done as bad to others. Be not long angry. Though anger may come into the bosom of a wise man, it passes through it as a wayfaring man. It dwells only in the bosom of fools. My hope and my prayer for us as caregivers is that we have the wisdom not to hang on to guilt and resentment and anger, that we have the wisdom to be able to release those things, so that our relationship with our care recipients is blessed, and that at the end of that caregiving journey, we can have peace as we look back upon our relationship with those that we had to take care of for this short period of time. Next week, we're going to talk about honor and respect. That's a good follow-up for the release of resentment and anger. So until then, take care.